I didn't grow up thinking I'd be the one holding the family together. But somehow, that's exactly what happened. Not because I was the oldest, I wasn't. Not because I was the favorite. God, no. But because I was dependable, quiet, responsible. The one who didn't complain when Mom and Dad leaned a little too hard on me. The one who swallowed the unfairness like it was air. And the one who paid off their debts without asking for a thank you. My name is Rachel. I'm 38 years old and I live, or rather used to live, in a small 3-bedroom house in upstate New York. Nothing fancy, but I owned it outright. Bought it after 10 years of working double shifts, saving every cent, skipping vacations and dinners out, while my parents floated from crisis to crisis, always a little behind. Credit card debt, medical bills, property taxes. I paid it all, quietly, regularly, because every time I thought about saying no, I'd picture my mother's worried face or hear my father's voice reminding me how good daughters take care of their families. And I was. Good. Too good. It started small. One winter, the furnace broke in their house. "Just until we figure it out," Mom had said. I wrote a check for $1,200. Then it was the roof. Then their car broke down. Then some old credit card bills I hadn't even known existed. "We'll pay you back," they said once, but they never did. And after a while, they stopped pretending they ever would. It wasn't that I had it easy. I didn't. I worked in the billing department of a dental clinic during the day, then managed accounts for a small restaurant group at night from my laptop. I wasn't rich. I was just responsible. I tracked every dollar. I clipped coupons. I fixed my own leaky sink when it broke because I couldn't justify a plumber. Meanwhile, my sister Grace flew to Florida for bachelorette parties and came back with new designer bags I knew she didn't pay for herself. She was 3 years younger, pretty, loud, charming. The kind of girl who could crash a car and still have Dad write the insurance check without asking what happened. While I was over here logging into their mortgage portal every other month to make sure they didn't lose the house. I knew it wasn't fair, but in our family, Grace was the delicate one, the one who struggled with stability. I was the sturdy one, the invisible crutch everyone leaned on. I didn't say anything when I found out Grace hadn't paid the property taxes in 2 years. I just covered it. Quietly. My parents never even knew. If they did, they never said a word. I figured that's what love looked like in our family. The one who could handle it did. The others didn't. But things started to shift last year. It wasn't one thing. It was a slow unraveling. A series of comments that at first I brushed off. Like when Mom mentioned Grace might need to move back home just until she gets back on her feet. Or when Dad said I was too rigid with my budgeting and how I should enjoy life more like Grace does. And then, one afternoon in March, I came by to drop off some groceries. Yes, still doing that. When I heard them talking in the kitchen, they didn't know I was there yet. I stood in the hallway and listened. "She's fine, she's always fine," Mom was saying. "We need to think about Grace now. She needs the house more than Rachel does." "We're leaving it to her in the will," Dad replied flatly. "She needs security." I stood there for a moment, not breathing, not moving, just letting the words wrap around me like a noose. After everything, after covering their bills, keeping them in that house, making sure it never went under, after playing accountant, repairman, therapist, and daughter, they were going to hand it all to Grace, the same Grace who couldn't even keep a job for more than 6 months, the same Grace who spent her rent money on concert tickets. I walked out of that house without even saying hello. I didn't confront them. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. I went home, sat on my couch, and stared at the wall for 3 hours. Then I opened my laptop and listed my house for sale. Because if I was going to keep being the invisible daughter, the good daughter, the one who always cleaned up the mess but never got a seat at the table, I was done. If they were going to give everything to Grace, then they could finally see what life was like without me quietly fixing everything behind the scenes. And I was just getting started. The decision to sell my house wasn't impulsive. It was surgical, clean, controlled. The kind of move you make when your heart stops expecting justice and your brain finally takes the wheel. I contacted a realtor the next morning. She was efficient, polite, maybe a little too cheerful for my mood, but I didn't need a therapist. I needed results. Within days, the photos were up. The listing was live, and interest came fast. The market was hot, and my house was well kept, because of course it was. I had cared for it the way I had cared for everything else, diligently, quietly, with no help and no recognition. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not Grace, not my coworkers, not even my closest friend, Maya, who had watched me carry this family like a one-woman rescue squad for over a decade. I wanted the decision to be mine, completely mine, unclouded by guilt or pleas or fake promises to do better. And I wanted to see what would happen when they needed me, and I wasn't there. In the meantime, the silence from my parents was deafening. Not a text, not a call, not even a passive-aggressive, "Are you okay?" which meant they hadn't noticed I'd left mid-conversation that day. Or worse, they had, and they didn't care. The offer came in 2 weeks later. Full asking price, all cash. Closing in 10 days. When I signed the papers, I felt nothing. No sadness, no fear, just a strange, hollow sense of finality. Like watching a tree fall in a forest you planted yourself, knowing it's time. I boxed up my life in 12 years of memories and hard-earned independence. No tears, just tape and labels. I moved into a short-term rental across town, a modest loft with creaky floors and a view of nothing, but it was mine. No memories, no obligations, no history of being the one who picked up the pieces. For the first time in years, I breathed. It was almost funny how quickly they noticed once I wasn't there. The first call came from Mom on a Tuesday. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, feigning casual. "Grace said she stopped by your place and there was a for sale sign out front. What's going on?" I paused, then said simply, "I sold it." She blinked on the other end of the line. I could hear the confusion tighten in her throat. "You what?" "I sold the house." A beat of silence. Then, "But why? That's your home." "No," I replied. It was a pit stop, a very expensive, very exhausting pit stop. "But where are you now? What are you doing?" "Living," I said, my voice cold but calm. "For once." She hesitated, then pivoted. "You didn't say anything. You didn't talk to us." "You didn't ask," I answered. "You've been too busy planning how to give everything I protected to Grace." I hung up before she could twist the narrative. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't angry. I was done. Done being the financial backup plan. Done being the one they relied on when the bills came due, when the water got cut off, when Grace overspent and underdelivered. Done being the daughter they only remembered when things got hard. And then it happened. 10 days after my house sold, I got a call from the county tax office. They had a question about the Harrington residence, my parents' address, specifically about the unpaid property taxes. 3 years behind, tens of thousands owed. "I'm sorry," I told the woman. "I'm not the owner of that home." "But we have records that you've made prior payments." "I no longer manage that property," I said, and ended the call. That same afternoon, a letter went out, not from me, but from the tax collector. Certified final notice. Eviction proceedings scheduled if payment wasn't made in full by the 15th of the following month. I didn't feel good about it, but I didn't feel bad either. I felt removed, detached, like I was finally watching the mess from outside the fire instead of standing inside it with a garden hose and a smile. That house they had been so eager to secure for Grace. It was about to be taken, and I wasn't lifting a single finger to stop it. The news didn't reach them immediately. That's the thing about people who've always been bailed out. They never check the mail. They assume someone else is handling it. And for years, that someone had been me. Grace didn't even know how property taxes worked, let alone that the payments were quarterly. My father had stopped logging into the online portal when I took over, and my mother, well, she hated anything with a login or a password. They were floating, as always, unaware of the tsunami approaching. It was Maya who noticed the notice before they did. She called me one night in early May. "Rach," she said, "I passed by your parents' place on the way to the vet today. There's a big orange sign on the front door. Something about a tax lien." I didn't even blink. "Yeah," I said, staring at my half-eaten dinner. "They're being evicted." Silence. Then, "What?" "I stopped paying the taxes. They never picked up the responsibility, and now it's all caught up with them." Maya exhaled, low and long. "Wow, I mean, good for you. Honestly, I didn't think you'd ever stop." "Neither did I admitted. That night, I slept a full 8 hours for the first time in months. The weight was shifting. For the first time, I wasn't holding up their foundation with my back. They were finally feeling what life was like without a silent savior, cleaning up every mess. It took another week for the panic to hit. The first real ripple came from Grace naturally, a voicemail, frantic and shrill. "Rachel, call me right now. The county says the house is in default. What the hell is going on? Did you forget to pay something?" That line, "Did you forget to pay something?" almost made me laugh. The assumption that I was still on duty, that I had simply slipped up this time. Not that I had walked away. Not that I had chosen to let it fall. I didn't respond. I let her stew in her confusion. And within 24 hours, I got the text from my father. Short, cold, impersonal. "We need to talk. You've put us in a very difficult position." I had put them in a difficult position, not the decades of ignoring responsibility, not the way they had thrown me under the bus for years while celebrating Grace's every mediocre milestone, not the countless checks I'd written to keep that roof over their heads. It was my absence that was the crime. They called me 3 times that day. I didn't answer. I was at work sipping coffee from a chipped mug, going over a dental payment plan for a family of 4 who'd just maxed out their credit card. Real people with real problems, not self-made fires and hand-me-down guilt. By Friday, I got an email. Subject line, URGENT, the house. It was from Mom. No greeting, just one long, panicked paragraph. "I don't know what's happening. We got a final notice from the county. They're saying we owe $22,000 in back taxes, and we have until the 15th or they're taking the house. This must be a mistake. Please, Rachel, help us fix this. Grace is terrified. We didn't know. Please call me." I didn't reply. I didn't forward it. I didn't even read it a second time. I just archived it and went on with my day. Because the truth is, I had spent years trying to warn them, quietly, gently, with spreadsheets and reminders and cautious conversations that always ended with them brushing me off or saying, "We trust you to handle it." And I had, for longer than I should have. But now they had to face the consequences of handing their lives over to a daughter they didn't think was worthy of the house she saved. I heard through Maya that Grace was calling around for loans. None of them approved her. Bad credit, no assets. She even tried crowdfunding, set up a GoFundMe that painted her as a victim of a family miscommunication, raised $112 before the campaign was quietly shut down. The panic escalated. They went to a lawyer. The lawyer asked to see their tax history. He saw my name on all the payments going back 6 years. Grace's name was nowhere. Neither was either of my parents. The paper trail was clean. It told the truth, louder than any of their excuses. I kept waiting for someone, any one of them, to show up at my door. But they didn't. Maybe they were too proud. Maybe they were too ashamed. Or maybe they still thought I'd swoop in at the last minute, cape on, ready to save the day. But this time, I didn't. The 15th came on a Tuesday. It rained that morning. Soft, steady, and quiet. I was sipping coffee on the balcony of my rental, watching the water stripe the glass. Peaceful. I hadn't turned on my phone yet, but around noon I checked the county website. Just curiosity, just closure. Property, 147 Linwood Avenue. Status, transferred to tax sale. Occupants, eviction scheduled. And just like that, it was done. They were no longer the owners of the house I'd protected for over a decade. The house I paid for without a thank you. The house they promised to give to Grace because she needed stability. The house they thought they deserved to keep living in without ever asking who was keeping it standing. Gone. Not to a fire, not to a storm, but to neglect, to their own blindness. And I wasn't even there to see it. The morning after the house was officially transferred to auction, I received the first voicemail from my father that didn't sound angry. It sounded broken. His voice was slower than usual, not slurred, but cracked, as if pride was wedged in his throat and wouldn't go down easy. "Rachel, this has gone too far. You've made your point, but we're out of time. We don't have anywhere to go. Grace is staying with a friend, but your mother and I—" He trailed off. Then, with a bitter edge, "You're punishing us for something we didn't understand. That's not right. We're your parents." I didn't hit play again. I didn't need to. The message was clear. The moment accountability arrived at their doorstep, they scrambled to turn it into my cruelty instead of their carelessness. I had expected rage. I had even braced for threats. But guilt? That was new. That was their last card, and they were playing it like it had never failed before. Except now, it did. Maya dropped by later that evening with takeout and a look on her face that said she knew. She always knew. "They're staying in a motel by the highway," she said quietly, opening a container of lo mein. "I drove past earlier today. I saw your mom getting out of a rideshare with a plastic bag full of groceries." I didn't respond right away. I just stared at my living room wall, thinking about how many times I had stood in their kitchen unloading groceries, checking the fridge, replacing expired milk, never once being thanked, never once being seen. "How long can they stay there?" I asked eventually. Maya shrugged. "Doubt it's long. I mean, they don't have income. And Grace, she's not stepping up. She's couch hopping. Someone posted about her smoking in a shared apartment. She got kicked out." I exhaled slowly. Not satisfaction, not even relief, just release. "I'm not doing it," I said aloud, "not this time." Maya didn't ask what it meant. She knew. They had started calling daily, alternating between guilt, anger, silence, and pleading. One day, I was heartless. The next, I was their only hope. Then I was selfish. Then the hero they knew I could still be. They didn't get it. They never had. This wasn't about a house anymore. It wasn't even about taxes. This was about years, decades of them watching me struggle under the weight of responsibility, while Grace tripped through life, cushioned by the excuse of fragility. I was never allowed to be fragile. I was the dependable one, the boring one, the stable one. They treated stability like a bottomless well they could drink from, and now it was dry. Then came the email. Subject, "You win." From Grace. "I hope you're happy. Mom's crying every day. Dad won't talk to me. I lost my job trying to sort this out, and I know you think you're some hero for letting them suffer, but you're not. You're just bitter. They were going to give me the house because I needed it, because you're fine. But I guess your ego couldn't take that, so congrats. They're homeless. Hope it was worth it." I didn't reply, because that email, entitled "Furious and So Utterly Blind," was proof that they all still saw me the same way. A resource, a problem solver, a function. Not a daughter, not a person. They believed the house was Grace's right, not because she earned it, but because I had already gotten mine. Because responsibility, to them, was punishment, and recklessness, something to be rewarded, pitied, defended. For years, I accepted that logic, but not anymore. That weekend, I met with my lawyer. Not just to confirm the sale was untouchable, which it was, but to discuss something new, something bold, something final. I want to make sure they can't use my name again, I told her. No co-signing, no emergency contact. No one can take out loans in my name or access my accounts. She nodded. We can set that up, full disassociation. But just to ask, are you sure? I smiled, not a cruel smile, not a smug one, a peaceful one. I've never been more sure of anything. Because this wasn't revenge. It was resurrection. Of my life, of my time, of my worth. And no one, not even the people who raised me, was going to bankrupt me again. In the weeks following the eviction, their silence became louder than any of their pleading voicemails or accusatory emails. The motel, I later heard, had kicked them out after their card declined twice. They weren't living on the street, not quite, but close enough that they had to stay in a friend's unfinished basement, the kind of place with no heat, no windows, and barely any plumbing, the kind of place I had once paid to renovate for someone else. Now it was their reality. I didn't visit. I didn't call. I didn't drive by to look. Instead, I started to live. Really live. Not the kind of living where you're constantly checking your bank account to see if you can cover someone else's overdue utility bill. Not the kind where you cancel dinner plans because your mother forgot to buy her medication again. But real living. Breathing without guilt. Sleeping without the weight of obligation suffocating my chest. I got promoted. I started yoga. I even planned a weekend away with Maya, my first vacation in years that didn't involve fixing someone else's life. And slowly, the space they'd taken up in my head began to empty. Then came the letter. Not an email, not a text, a letter. Handwritten, on my birthday. It came in a card envelope with my mother's familiar script on the front. I stood with it in my hand for a long time before opening it. My breath was steady, my pulse calm. There was no hope left to damage, no need to prove anything. I opened it because I wanted to see how far the delusion had stretched. Inside was a 2-page letter. The first page was my mother's, software manipulative, drenched in nostalgia. We never meant to hurt you, sweetheart. We were just trying to do what was best for everyone. Grace has always needed more help than you. She's different, sensitive. You've always been so strong. I guess we leaned on that too much. I miss you. I miss our family. Can't we find our way back? The second page was from my father. Blunt, arrogant, defensive even in supposed apology. Rachel, I won't pretend to understand your choices, but I'm not blind to the consequences. Your absence has been noted. You wanted to make a statement. You did. Loud and clear. I hope you feel proud. But someday you'll realize that family is about forgiveness, about enduring each other's mistakes. We did what we thought was right. If that makes us villains, so be it. I folded the pages carefully, neatly, no tears, no shaking hands, just clarity. They hadn't changed. They had learned nothing. They still believed that their betrayal was just a mistake, that my silence was a phase, that eventually the daughter they molded, the quiet fixer, would return and resume her duties. They didn't understand that she no longer existed. I didn't reply. Instead, I took that letter and slid it into a folder I had labeled Records, the same one that held the receipts for the tax payments I made for them, the mortgage stubs, the emergency repairs I never asked them to pay back. And now, this, their attempt to rewrite history in cursive. Because if there was one thing I'd learned, it was that keeping a paper trail was power. It was memory. It was protection. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a blocked number. I answered without thinking. It was Grace. No introduction. No hello, just her voice, dry and cold. Did you really block me from listing you as an emergency contact? What if something had happened to Mom or Dad? I took a breath. Then calmly. Then the emergency would be dealt with by whoever's still benefiting from their decisions. I'm not part of that system anymore. You're unbelievable, she hissed. You think you're better than all of us, don't you? No, I said quietly. "I just don't think I deserve to be buried with you." She hung up. I didn't call back. I sat on the edge of my bed afterward, not angry, not even sad, just free. For the first time in my life, I wasn't someone's insurance policy, not the backup plan and not the fixer, not the emotional punching bag disguised as the strong one. I was just Rachel, and that was finally enough. Later that evening, Maya brought over wine and 2 candles in the shape of miniature houses. "A housewarming gift for your peace of mind," she said with a grin. "You know, since you actually live alone now, in every beautiful way that counts." We laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt good, clean, full of breath. I lit one of the candles and watched it flicker against the wall. It smelled like cedar and warmth and safety. I didn't need their forgiveness. I didn't need their regret. All I needed was what I'd finally given myself: space, boundaries, and a future where I was the main character, not the sidekick in someone else's chaos. And for the first time, that future didn't scare me. It felt like a beginning. By summer, their names weren't even in my vocabulary, not daily, not hourly, not haunting the back of every thought like some echo of guilt or obligation. They'd become background noise, static I could turn off. And in the silence, something incredible happened. I heard my own voice. It was quiet at first, not dramatic, not some cinematic revelation, just small things. Like waking up on a Sunday and realizing I didn't need to check my bank account for someone else's needs. Like walking past a hardware store and not instinctively thinking, Dad's gutter's probably falling again. Like opening my fridge and knowing every item in it was there because I wanted it, not because Mom called asking for groceries last minute. I had time now to read, to breathe, to notice things. And then one day, I noticed a listing. Not just any listing, the listing. A small, weathered house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't have modern cabinets or polished marble. But it had soul. The kind of worn wood floors that whisper stories and a porch that looked like it could hold secrets and coffee cups in equal measure. I stared at the photos for 30 minutes. Then I called Maya. "You're going to think I've lost it," I said. "Only if you say you're buying your parents a house," she replied flatly. I laughed, genuinely. Number, I'm buying me a home. 3 weeks later, I signed the paperwork. A modest mortgage, nothing fancy, just mine. A place with no memory of being used, drained, manipulated. A place where every wall would only hear my voice, my music, my silence. When I moved in, I didn't tell a soul outside my circle. No social media post, no family update. Just a quiet celebration with Maya, a bottle of cheap champagne, and a takeout pizza eaten on the floor between moving boxes. "You did it," she said that night, clinking her plastic cup against mine. "You finally chose you." I nodded, eyes stinging, not with sadness, with something far more foreign: peace. Later that week, I found myself hanging pictures. Not of holidays or posed family photos, God, no, but snapshots of real moments. Me and Maya laughing mid-bite at a diner, a photo of my first published article in a local newsletter, the view from a lake I'd once hiked to alone. I even hung the tax sale notice in my closet, not out of pettiness, but as a reminder that boundaries weren't cruelty, that choosing myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary, that saving myself was never a betrayal, no matter how loudly the people I stopped saving screamed otherwise. In early August, I ran into an old neighbor from my parents' street at the farmer's market. She did a double take before smiling. "Rachel, oh, I haven't seen you in months. How are your parents adjusting? I heard about the house." I kept my expression calm, neutral. "They're figuring it out," I said. "I'm doing really well, though." She blinked, maybe expecting more. But I gave her nothing else. Because not everything needed explaining. and not every pain needed to be aired to people who hadn't been there when it mattered. The conversation shifted to tomatoes and summer heat, and we parted ways. But as I walked to my car, a strange sense of clarity settled over me. This was it. This was who I was now. I wasn't the daughter who paid to be tolerated. I wasn't the invisible sibling who kept the machine running while Grace made smoke and mirrors. I was a woman who had chosen to break the contract her family had written in invisible ink. And as I pulled into my driveway, I let myself smile. Not the forced, polite smile I'd worn for years, but something softer, quieter, real. Inside, the sun was spilling across the living room like a warm blanket. I kicked off my shoes, set down my bag, and sat on the floor. No furniture yet, just the house, just me. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. It was a Wednesday, late afternoon, the kind of day where the sky forgets whether it wants to rain or stay golden. I had just finished rearranging my modest bookshelf, alphabetically, like always, and was halfway through making tea when I heard the knock. 3 sharp taps. Not the mail carrier, not Maya. She always texted first. Something in the air shifted, and before I even opened the door, I knew. The chill crept up my spine, not from fear, but from recognition. I opened it, and there they were. My mother and father standing together on my new porch, looking every bit like the ghosts of decisions past. My mother wore a wrinkled cardigan that clung to her arms like a last defense. My father looked thinner, his pride barely holding up his jaw, but it was the way they stood, close but not united, that told me everything. They were desperate, but not aligned. "Rachel," Mom said first, eyes searching for softness in mine. "Can we come in?" Dad added, voice strained. I didn't move, not out of cruelty, but because I needed that pause, that holy moment of decision. Years of being the one to open the door, emotionally, financially, literally, had trained me to say yes. But the woman I'd become wasn't trained anymore. She was conscious. "No," I said calmly. It hit them like a slap, not the volume of the word, the firmness of it, the finality. "Just for a minute," Mom tried again, fingers curling around the strap of her purse like it could anchor her. We have nowhere else to go." "You have each other," I said. "And Grace." Dad's mouth tightened. "Grace," he spat, as if her name tasted like regret. "She's not reliable." "She never was," I replied, and watched the impact of that truth land on their faces. "But that didn't stop you from giving her everything." "We thought," Mom started, but I raised my hand. Not to silence her, to protect myself from the excuses I'd already memorized. "I know what you thought. You thought I'd always be there, that I'd pick up the pieces quietly like I always have, that I'd pay, clean, explain, apologize." Neither of them spoke. "You never asked what it cost me," I continued. "You never noticed how exhausted I was, how invisible you made me feel." Tears welled up in Mom's eyes, but I didn't let them sway me. I'd seen those tears before, the kind that came only when consequences did. "We lost the house," Dad said flatly, as if stating a fact might win him sympathy. "I know," I replied. "I stopped paying the taxes. Grace never started, and neither of you thought to check who was holding up the foundation." He looked like he wanted to say something cruel, but he didn't. Maybe because he finally realized I wasn't the same daughter who used to flinch under his disappointment. "We're not asking for money," Mom whispered. "Just time. A place to figure things out." "You had time," I said. "Years of it. While I worked 2 jobs and kept you afloat." Silence. Heavy, sticky, shameful. It was the silence I had waited decades for. Not because I wanted them to hurt, but because I needed them to finally hear it. "I'm not angry anymore," I added, more to myself than to them. "I'm just done." Mom's voice cracked. "So that's it?" "No," I said gently. That's the beginning, for me. Dad stepped back, maybe in shock, maybe in surrender, but Mom lingered a moment longer. I loved you, she said, past tense. I didn't flinch. I still love you, I answered, but I won't destroy myself for it anymore. I closed the door, not with force, not with drama, just quietly. And behind it, I stood still for a while. No tears came, no panic, no guilt. Just a deep, soul-level breath I didn't know I'd been waiting to exhale. And that's when I knew this wasn't the final confrontation. It was the last test. And I had passed. They didn't knock again. I waited for it, for the guilt, the apology, the follow-up call, the sudden awareness that maybe they had finally heard me. But it never came. And truthfully, that silence. It was louder than any outburst they could have thrown my way. 2 days passed, then 4, a week. Then Maya came by with groceries and a raised brow. So, she said casually, tossing a bag of apples onto my counter, I heard your parents were spotted at the shelter downtown. I didn't flinch. I stirred the soup I was cooking. Okay. She studied me. That's all you have to say? I paused, ladle in midair. What do you want me to say? That it hurts, that you feel torn, that you're tempted to go fix it all again. I poured the soup into bowls and handed her one. I don't feel torn. I feel sad, sure. I feel a kind of grief I can't even name. But I don't feel tempted. Because here's the truth no one tells you. Walking away from people who have broken you doesn't always come with fireworks and triumph. Sometimes it feels like laying down a sword you've held for decades and realizing your arms don't know how to relax anymore. They'd always told me family is unconditional. What they meant was, our conditions are yours to meet. Now, the conditions had changed, and I wasn't the one who moved the goalposts. I had just walked away from the game. That week, I had dinner with coworkers and didn't lie about being busy to avoid questions about my family. I told the truth. It's complicated, but I'm doing better now. One of them, Jasmine, newly divorced, 2 kids, gave me a look that was all understanding, no pity. We don't always get to pick our pain, she said, but we get to choose what we build from it. And that sentence clung to me. Because I was building something, not just a life free of their expectations, but something real, something mine. My days had become fuller in a different way, not with to-do lists dictated by someone else's dysfunction, but with small, sacred rituals, morning walks, books I never had time to finish before, music that wasn't drowned out by my father's criticisms or Grace's chaos. Sometimes I thought about reaching out, about writing a letter, not for them, but for me, to say, I understand you're hurting, I'm hurting too, but I won't come back, because I nearly lost myself last time, and I just got her back. But then I remembered that they wouldn't hear the letter. Not really. They'd only see it as a crack, a possible way back in. And I wasn't leaving the door open this time, not even a sliver. Not until they learned how to knock with something more than shame and desperation. I received a text from Grace that weekend. I hope you're proud. They're sleeping on someone's couch. Mom's sick. Dad hasn't spoken in days. You've officially destroyed this family. And I realized something as I stared at it. It wasn't even about them anymore. She was projecting her own helplessness, her own panic, her own realization that the scaffolding of our broken family had always been me, and now it had crumbled. I didn't respond. I screenshotted it, saved it in my records folder, and then blocked her number. Not out of pettiness, out of preservation. Because for the first time, I wasn't interested in being understood. I was interested in being well, and healing doesn't ask for permission. It demands distance. That night, I stood on my new porch, mug of tea in hand, watching the sun melt into the horizon. I thought about legacy, not the kind written into wills or passed through houses or heirlooms, but the kind we create when we stop the bleeding. When we say, this ends with me, and I knew in my bones that mine had already begun. It looked nothing like the family I came from, but it felt more like home than anything they had ever built. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from an attorney's office. Crisp envelope, heavy cream cardstock, the kind of formal communication you don't ignore. At first, my heart stumbled. Had something happened? Had one of them? But it wasn't that. It was worse. It was a notice of provisional inheritance interest. Apparently, my parents had listed me, years ago, as a beneficiary of a modest life insurance policy and some residual estate value tied up in personal items, an old savings account, and a few assets that hadn't yet been liquidated or seized. The policy had matured. The bank account had closed. The attorney wanted to know if I intended to accept what was now legally mine. Roughly $18,400. It was money I could use. My new house needed plumbing upgrades. My car was one oil change away from retirement. I had a dentist bill I'd been ignoring. But my hand froze over the letter. Because this wasn't a gift. It was a leash. It was a final, desperate attempt to tie me back to the mess. To say, look, we left you something. That means it wasn't all bad. That means you owe us something in return. I folded the letter and set it aside. Not in the trash, not in the records folder either, just in a drawer, because I needed time. Time to sit with the fact that even after everything, even after the eviction, the shelter, the screaming voicemails, and the cold porch confrontation, they still wanted to leave pieces of themselves inside my life. And what was even more terrifying, that part of me still wanted to receive it, not the money, but the meaning. The attempt at something resembling restitution. But here's the thing about emotional abuse dressed up in polite paperwork. It's still control. It's still manipulation. It's still them telling me, you're never really free. Even now, you owe us. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room, no TV on, no music, just the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of my new house settling. The home I bought on my terms, with my effort, my sanity, my earned silence. And I thought, what would younger me do? The answer was easy. She'd cash the check, fix the plumbing, replace the bald tires, and tell herself that maybe, just maybe, this meant they finally saw her worth. But I'm not her anymore. I don't need a payoff for my pain. I need space, clean air, windows that open to the world, not back into the past. The next morning, I called the attorney. "This is Rachel Emerson," I said, "regarding the estate notice. Yes, I received it." The woman on the other end was polite, professional. "Would you like to proceed with the disbursement?" I hesitated. Then, "No, I'd like to waive the claim." There was a pause. "Are you sure?" "You're entitled?" "I'm sure. Please redirect the funds to the secondary beneficiary if one exists, or let it revert to the estate. I don't want any part of it." "Understood. I'll send formal confirmation." I hung up. My hands trembled, not with doubt, with release. Because choosing not to accept what came from them, that was power. That was mine. And I hadn't realized how much of it I'd given away until that moment. I went for a long walk that afternoon, past the coffee shop where I wrote half my resignation letter, past the hardware store where the guy still remembered the name of the stain I used on my porch swing, past the new life I was slowly, steadily stitching together. And when I came back, the air in my house felt different, lighter, like some invisible string had finally snapped. That night, I wrote a letter. Not to send, just to write, to name it, to honor the girl I used to be, the one who paid for everything in silence and called it love. I wrote, "You gave me debt and shame and responsibility that wasn't mine. You gave me love with expiration dates. You gave me conditions, and I gave you everything, but I'm done. And I'm not bitter, I'm clean, I'm not angry, I'm free. You don't get to write my story anymore." I folded the letter, burned it in a ceramic bowl on my porch, watched the ashes drift into the sky like tiny truths no longer tethered to my chest, and I whispered to no one in particular, "I'm still here, and I'm not yours." Fall arrived without fanfare. One morning the trees were green and the next gold. The wind grew sharper, leaves crisped underfoot, and just like that my world turned quieter. Still, but not empty. I started volunteering at a local literacy program, a few hours a week at the public library. Nothing grand, just helping adults learn to read, filling out job applications, understanding bills. One of the women, Brenda, brought her grandson sometimes, a quiet boy who liked sitting near me while I worked. She called me Miss Rachel, always with a smile like she knew something about me I hadn't told her. One evening, after we packed up, she lingered at the door. "You have the kind of calm people come back for," she said. I hadn't been called safe in years. That night, I walked home through piles of rust-colored leaves and thought, this is what family could look like. Not the blood kind, not the kind that suffocates you in exchange for obligation, but the kind you build from presence, from trust, from not being afraid to just sit in silence together. Maya and I hosted a small gathering for Thanksgiving. Just her girlfriend, a neighbor who'd recently lost his wife, a woman from my yoga class, and Brenda. We ate too much pie, drank cheap wine, and laughed until someone knocked over a candle. It was nothing like the Thanksgivings I'd grown up with, where everything was served on china, tension hung in the air like gravy steam, and someone always cried in the bathroom. This one felt easy, real. After dessert, we sat around the fire pit in my backyard. Maya leaned her head on my shoulder and said softly, "This is a new tradition, huh?" I nodded. One that doesn't ask me to bleed for it. Everyone was sharing what they were grateful for. Maya said love. Brenda said second chances. The neighbor said apple crumble. And when it came to me, I paused for a long time. Then I said, "I'm grateful I left." No one asked what I meant. No one needed to. They knew. Because sometimes gratitude isn't about what you gained. It's about what you survived. Later that night, when the house was quiet again and the wine glasses were rinsed, I sat on my porch swing and opened my email. Another message from Grace. I almost deleted it without reading, but something made me click. Subject. Final word. "I don't know what you think you've won. They're sick, Rachel. They're getting older. Dad barely speaks. Mom can't work. You're going to regret not being there when it mattered. No. Hi. No. Hope you're well. Just one last jab dipped in guilt and bitterness. And you know what? It didn't hurt, because I had been there when it mattered. For years, I showed up quietly, consistently when no one else did. I carried burdens I never agreed to. I absorbed pain that wasn't mine. I sacrificed and swallowed and stitched together the kind of safety they never appreciated. I was there for every unpaid bill, every late-night call, every broken thing they pushed my way. And I was there for myself, too, when I finally walked away. I didn't reply, because the final word wasn't hers, it was mine. And I'd already said it when I said no. No to the guilt, no to the constant fixing, no to being told that my worth was based on what I could provide. I stood up, turned off the porch light, and walked back into my warm, quiet house. It didn't smell like resentment. It didn't echo with blame. It smelled like cinnamon and pine, and it echoed with peace. By December, I no longer checked my phone out of habit. No more instinct to scan for missed calls. No spike of anxiety when a private number lit up the screen. Just quiet. A clean screen, a clean house, and a life free from apology. On Christmas Eve, I made myself a roast chicken, lit some candles, and played an old jazz record. I'd never done that before. Holidays had always meant performing, smiling through tension, dodging passive-aggressive comments, trying to fill a table that never had enough love to go around. This year, the table was small, but it was enough. Around 8 p.m., Maya showed up unannounced with a box wrapped in newspaper and a bottle of cider. "Thought you might like this," she said, shrugging like it wasn't a big deal. But her eyes were bright, and her cheeks flushed from the cold. I opened the box. Inside was a small wooden frame, and inside that a printout of a quote. "You don't owe anyone the pieces they broke in you." I stared at it for a long time. Then I hugged her. "I should have walked away sooner," I said. She pulled back and looked me straight in the eyes. "Maybe, but you walked away exactly when you were ready." That night, I placed the frame on my nightstand. I didn't dream about them, not the way I used to. There was no scene of me rushing to save them, no fantasy where they apologized and took me back into the family like a prodigal daughter, finally respected, just deep, unbroken sleep. The next morning, I took a walk before the sun rose. Fresh snow blanketed the street. The air was so still it made my thoughts feel like they had room to stretch. At the end of the block, an older couple was pulling a sled down their front steps, laughing as their granddaughter shouted from the porch. The woman caught my eye and smiled. I smiled back. That simple. That human. I thought about my parents. Probably somewhere cramped and cold, still angry, still blaming, still waiting for a version of me that no longer existed. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel responsible for their unhappiness. I felt sorry for it, but it wasn't mine to fix. Later that afternoon, I opened the closet and pulled out a cardboard box I hadn't touched since the move. It was labeled Old Life. Inside were photos, cards, a few childhood trinkets, nothing expensive but heavy just the same. I sifted through it slowly. There was a birthday card from Grace from years ago that read, "I know I'm a mess, but thanks for always being the stable one." I set it aside. That wasn't a compliment. It was a confession wrapped in entitlement. Then I found an old photo of me, maybe 14, standing outside the house they'd eventually lose. I was holding a rake, smiling awkwardly at the camera, my arm half raised like I wasn't sure if I belonged in the shot. That girl had no idea what she was already carrying. No idea how much more weight they'd keep piling on her shoulders while calling her strong. I placed the photo in the fire pit outside, watched the edges curl and disappear, because I didn't need proof of the person I used to be. I was living as the woman she had fought to become. In January, I started applying to graduate programs, something I'd once thought I was too old for, too tired, too obligated. Now, I was free to want something just for me. Writing, teaching, maybe even starting a foundation to help other women disentangle from families that taught them to equate love with labor. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about closure. It was about purpose. About building something from the wreckage, not to prove anything, just to live well. By February, Brenda had introduced me to her niece, an art teacher going through a divorce who invited me to a gallery opening. I went, not because I felt like I had to, but because I wanted to. I wore a dress I used to save for occasions, put on red lipstick, took up space. At one point, standing in front of a canvas filled with bright reds and ruptured yellows, someone asked, "What do you see?" And without thinking, I said, "Freedom." That word, that feeling, it no longer scared me, it guided me. And somewhere in the quiet of that gallery, surrounded by strangers who hadn't hurt me, I realized I had left behind more than just a family. I had left behind the belief that survival was all I deserved. Now I wanted more. And I wasn't afraid to ask for it. It came on a Wednesday, like the first knock. I was on my way out the door to meet Brenda and her grandson for a late lunch when my phone rang. I almost didn't look. I rarely do anymore. But something in me paused. Unknown caller. I let it go to voicemail. By the time I got to the cafe, the message had already transcribed itself on my screen, a name I hadn't seen in months, Grace. I don't know what I expected. A final demand? Another guilt-ridden monologue? But when I sat down and finally hit play, her voice sounded different. Slower, rough. Like it had been dragged through regret and scraped against rock bottom. "Hey, it's me. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. I wanted to say I get it now. All of it. Everything you did, everything you carried. I'm living it. Mom's not doing well. Dad barely speaks. They talk about you sometimes, but they'll never admit they miss you. I wanted to say I'm sorry." She paused. "You were never the villain. You were the parachute, and we cut the cords." Another pause. "I'm not asking for anything. I just needed to tell you that, in case you wondered if we ever saw it." That was it. No request, no manipulation, just a fractured olive branch drifting into the wind. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't feel compelled to respond, because I wasn't wondering anymore. I wasn't waiting for them to see it. I had already seen it in myself. I had already validated my own worth in the quiet months without them. Still, the message didn't feel useless. It felt like a closing bracket. Not a door swinging open, but a final chapter turned. I saved it. Not to replay it, but to remember what clarity sounds like. Too late. That night, I journaled. Not about them, about me. I wrote about how I wanted to spend spring hiking more, painting again, maybe even fostering a dog. I listed the names of the people who had shown up without asking me to bleed for them, and I made a list titled, "What I Give Myself Now." Time. Grace, the real kind. Soft mornings, loud laughter. Rest without guilt, love that doesn't need fixing, a home that feels like breath, not burden. I slept like a child. In the morning, I made pancakes and ate them slowly, barefoot, the windows open, letting cold air bite gently at my skin. The world felt new again, not because it had changed, but because I had. And as I cleaned up the dishes, I realized something I hadn't said out loud yet. I didn't just leave them behind, I came back to myself. And she was still there. Battered but whole, scarred but shining. And finally, fully mine.